So hello, everybody. My name is Man Martin. I'm the moderator of this panel. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, give everybody else a chance to come in, but it looks like people are starting to flock in now. So we'll just give everybody just another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get this thing underway. I hope everybody's had a great conference. From my end, it's been a lovely experience. It's such a privilege always to talk to other writers. We tend to work, we work in isolation. And it's nice to say, oh, actually, I'm not as strange as other people think I am. You're at a social gathering and you say you're an author and people sort of recoil, they back away. So anyway, this panel is called Pearls of Wisdom. And there's no particular thread. It's just the individual pearls as I make it out. For this one especially, I'm hoping that you in attendance in the cyber world are going to post your questions, and because this is for you. So when you do it, I will do my best as the moderator to address those and throw them out to the panelists. So I want to introduce everybody, and I'm going to go sort of counterclockwise on my screen. First of all is Gilly Segal, who is the author of I Will Not Die With You Tonight. And also, I cannot remember the name of your Captain Marvel book. Please forgive me. And Captain Marvel Shadow Code. Shaun Hamill, who is the author of The Cosmology of Monsters. Robert Gwaltney, the author of The Cicada Tree. Andy Davidson, the author of The Hollow Kind. Piper Huguley, excuse me, mispronounced your name. Piper Huguley, who's written an entire series, the Home to Milford College series, which goes across multi-generations. And then a new piece of historical fiction by her own design, which is a novel of Anne Lowe, who was the daughter of slaves who went on to become a fashion designer to the stars. And last but not least, Kimberly Brock, who wrote the Lost Book of Eleanor Dare and I can't read my own handwriting, please forgive me. The River Witch, of course, the River Witch. So, sorry, I'm just a putz. I want to start just by thinking about how do people start. Someone in an email response to me said that the best advice I got was just start working. Gilly, I know that you work sort of in the cracks of the rest of your life, which I think is the situation for most of us. What advice have you heard or can you give for people who have a regular life to live and still want to find time to pursue their creative projects?
Yeah, I do. I do what I call writing in the cracks because I work a full-time day job and I have kids to whom it feels like I'm sometimes an unpaid executive assistant. And early on when I first started writing, I was very precious. I had to be in the coffee shop with the mug of coffee and the muse had to be on my shoulder. And I was very precious about writing time and I really wasn't finishing anything. So these days, I have learned to write wherever I am with whatever I've got. And a lot of times I'm like sitting at hockey practice in the stands with my notes app open, scribbling away and, 50 words, 100 words, 200 words here and there at the end of the day at the end of a year will result in a novel the same way that 4 dedicated hours in a coffee shop will. So my advice, if you're struggling to balance, is to find a way to be less precious and to get those words in wherever and however you can.
Right, right. Shaun, what is your advice on just getting started?
I mean, just to echo what Gilly said, I also work a full-time day job. But the truth is that for me personally, I know that I can only write about 2 hours a day max in one session. Now editing, maybe I can go longer, but like when I'm composing something brand new. So so it's really about finding the time. So I get up early in the morning. I get up at 5. My fiance is in nursing school, so she's got to get up super early. So I get up, I make the coffee, and then I just sit down and write till it's time to get the kids up to go to school. And usually that'll get me most of the way towards my word count for the day. And if not, then, I've got my lunch break at work or whatever. So really, I'm just kind of echoing what she already said about writing in the cracks. It's just about finding those moments where it takes less time than you think it will, as long as you're not, overly precious about it. I'm sorry that my answer is not that much different.
So what's the word count that you aim for each day?
Typically I aim for 1,000. Lately I've dropped to 500 just because it's been hard to find that extra time. But as long as I'm hitting that 500 only takes about an hour total, working by hand. So it's, on the good days, I'm still doing 1,000, but on days whenever things are just really crazy at work, then that 500 has to do. And usually that's enough to keep me going, to feel like I've got the momentum and keep the story kind of rolling. So yeah, but historically I've reached for 1,000 a day when I am composing.
So Gilly, do you have a word count that you aim for?
I do not. I'm a very slow writer. And so for me, I'm just aiming for forward progress. Right.
As long as the ball is moving. So Kimberly, tell us about you. How do you arrange your day, or how do you squeeze in time to write?
Well, I forego all grooming. I drink a lot of coffee. Dental care is not great. I mean, I'm joking.
There's
but
only so
really,
much you have to share.
It is prioritizing things. I have 3 kids, and they are growing up, and you would think that it would be getting easier. 1 is graduated college, 1 is in college, and then I have 1 that's a freshman in high school. And instead, it seems to be busier. And people are always coming in and out of the house. And I know that I have friends who get up at 5:30 in the morning, and I just don't believe God's even awake at 5:30 in the morning. So I cannot write then. What I've learned is that you kind of have to find your own rhythm with it. And for me, when story is most active in my brain, it's dark outside. So I've kind of had to prioritize that and find the quiet times when I can sit down and write. I don't write to a word count. When I do, I try to shoot for 1K, just like you were saying, Shaun. But I try and remember to take the pressure off myself a little bit, that I'm always writing, whether it's just in my head work or whether I'm at the desk. You know, the research, maybe reading time even has to count. So I'm always at work. Technical writing, where I'm actually sitting at my desk, you have to find your own pattern and when and where works best for you, because I could try and sit down with a schedule and nothing's going to happen. I know kind of the sweet spot. I know what the magic needs to be around me. So that's my best advice.
So you think you're more of a night owl than an early bird?
Oh yeah.
Where do you fall?
Totally.
Yeah. So Andy, what about you? What are your best tips for just getting started and producing work?
Well, I can speak from practical experience. Like, the way I do it is to close the door. That's my best advice, is shut the door. Find wherever you work, metaphorically, shut the door, find a place of no distraction. I work during the day. I teach, and so my teaching schedule is flexible in terms of like my hours. But the thing that's not flexible about my life is that we have a lot of cats that need to be fed at exactly the same time every day. And if they are not fed, we have one in particular who is very vocal about it, and he will remain vocal until he is fed. And so I have a very narrow window in the morning between about 9, say 8 o'clock, and about 11 o'clock where I can work productively before that ramps up. And then by the afternoon, it's usually turn and focus to other things, because I don't have a good creative mind in the afternoon. I tend to work better in the morning. So, but yeah, closing the door would be my first step.
So Robert?
It's just a piece of cake. No writer ever said. I have a day job too. And in order for me to get any writing done, I have to get up before God about 4:30 in the morning and write a couple of hours, 4:30 to 6:30. And then weekends are critical writing time for me as well. But what I found as of late is I sort of like schedule dates with my characters in the car on my way into the office when I'm having my coffee. like the other morning, I've got this character I'm trying to figure out. So I went on a date with Miss Flora Dean Bird, and we just had a conversation. So I'm always in my head with the story constantly. I travel with a notebook, always scribbling notes. And you're right. You're like Gilly says, we're just riding in the cracks.
So Piper, how do you stay productive?
Well, I remember those days when my son was in football, and I would take the Alpha Smart and just be at football practice, writing on the Alpha Smart. Because I teach as well, and I used to be able to get up, and the pandemic changed my sleeping patterns completely. I used to get the 8 o'clock classes and everything. I'm like, oh yeah, give them her, not anymore. So it's shifted to me writing more in the evenings, or of course on days that I'm not teaching, when I'm able to get some words down. So that's how I do it.
But like Gilly, you seem like someone, you're saying you could work even when there's other stuff around you and people talking and running touchdowns and stuff.
Yeah,
That's
you have
possible.
you have to make that adjustment.
That's
want the
remarkable.
time.
How, so for just for Gilly and Piper, like, how do you, I am a little precious. I can squeeze it in, but I need a closed door. I just, hey, 15 minutes, give me 15 minutes. That's all I'm going to ask today. But I was never been able to write if there's stuff happening. How do you do it? Is there a recipe you can give for that?
I think you train yourself to focus, right? Earphones and ostentatious earphones, by the way, so that people can clearly see that you don't hide your little earbuds in there, because then people are going to talk to you. So like for me, it's a very obvious set of earphones and music. And then I just kind of have trained myself to ignore what's happening around me. It's easier when I don't want to pretend this is always easy. There have been plenty of practice where I'll slam the computer shut and be like, well, that was waste. Right. But you sort of train yourself to focus, and when the writing's going well, you're in the scene and you kind of go. It's not really magic. It's really just willpower.
Right.
And knowing that it's not going to get done otherwise.
Right.
Right. And that's the thing. It's not going to get done otherwise, because over the years I've trained, like I said, to sleep when the kid is sleeping and all of that. For people who are staying up into the night and all of that, I marvel at the fact that they're able to do that, because it's just not possible.
Well, I had to start staying up into the night, Piper, because I ran my car battery down twice in the parking lot riding, and the preacher at the daycare had to come out and jump my car off twice. So I learned, but yeah, you do tune it out. And I don't know about you guys that are talking about this, but I draft better if I'm in a quiet place. Like I can't do it in a coffee shop because I eavesdrop. But I can edit anywhere. I can revise anywhere. If I have work already there on the page, I can go to town and it doesn't matter what's going on around me. So it's kind of a different process that way too, for me.
I think it's really personal too, right? Like I'm listening to y'all who talk about getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, I would be a monster. Shaun has to put me in his next monster book if I tried to. So it's not that one is success. I just couldn't do that.
Grouchy. I'd write a really grouchy book.
Yeah, a teacher of mine, Tony Grooms, pointed out if you would write just 200 words a day, at the end of the year, you have a 78,000 word novel. And it's like, that's an achievable thing. I tend to get up in the mornings myself. I don't reach nearly your word count. I'm a wonderfully inefficient writer. But I have found that if I can start in the morning, then through the day, whatever else I'm doing, when I'm supposed to be paying attention to everybody else, I'm silently, mentally revising what I worked on earlier. Do you, in some cases, your publishers may set them for you. Do you set deadlines for yourself, other than your maybe a daily word count or expectation? And do you meet them? And are they helpful to you if you use them? So let's start with Piper on this one. Piper, what about you?
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of in the cave right now, because I have a deadline for my publisher that it's already been extended. So there's no choice.
So
Figure it
this, I mean, right now you're shaking your fist at God. But,
out.
but I'm serious about this. Does the deadline help you in some way? Does it say, okay, damn it, I'm gonna have to do this. I can't, the cat just goes hungry today.
Yeah, right. Because there's a payment at the end of that. So
Right.
mhm. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. It's motivate. That's motivation. Like the
Right.
real carrot at the end of the stick.
Right, and vice versa.
This is green, and it is like. I guess.
So Kimberly, what about you? Do you set deadlines for yourself, or does your publisher set them for you?
I set deadlines, publisher sets them for me, agent sets them for me. Sometimes we push them. But I'm a type A, you know, I'm an overachiever. I want to reach the deadline. And it is very difficult for me to go to my agent and say, this is not working. And she's very good at saying it's a creative process. So you have a goal. I do have a hard deadline, but then I try and set little deadlines in between. And that helps me not to feel the pressure of the big one at the end.
Right.
And that's not to say I won't ask for an extension if I need one, because I don't want to turn in a really bad book, you know?
Right. Someone, I'm sorry, anonymous attendee says, if you were to redo your author journey, what would you have done differently? Everybody's life has been perfect up to this point. No changes, no regrets.
Nobody brave.
Well, I think that I would have become more serious sooner.
Mhm.
Perhaps I think that you know, there was a point in time where I could just feel the clock ticking, and I thought if I don't start now, it will never happen. I'm not really regretful of it, but I think that if I did have an opportunity to change something, I think perhaps maybe publish my first novel when I was 40 instead of 53.
So start sooner. Gilly, you look like you got something on your mind.
So my writing community is really integral to me doing this at all, right? So the group of sort of writers that I've gathered around me, that I talk with, that I, you know, that help counsel me through plot problems, I didn't find them until quite late. So I think if I had it to do over again, I would be more intentional about cultivating my writer friends earlier on in the process. The business is really solo. If it, you know, even as a co-author, right? I have one, tends to be really solo and insular, but you need that community around you to help you make it through.
I used to think it was the most marvelous coincidence that you know, Hemingway and Steinbeck and Fitzgerald, you know, knew each other. Isn't that amazing? It's like, no, they sought each other out is the reason. Piper, if you could do your journey over again, what would you do differently, perhaps?
Maybe watch a little less TV.
Oh, but you would have missed all this Gilligan Island.
Yeah, I just, everything that I'm doing now came after some serious head thumping, you know, and you know, trying to figure things out or whatever. So I don't know. How do you get more sense without getting your head bumped? It's just a part of life. So
I maybe that is true. You know, I mean, for better or worse, the experiences that got us here are the experiences that got us here. So,
yeah,
you know, if I did it differently, I wouldn't be this person.
yeah, that's
writing
true.
this. Andy, what about you? Are there any changes you would have made or you would have done differently?
I'd probably ask more questions of the teacher. Well, I don't know. I mean, I've had good teachers, but I was always the quiet student in class, and I was always the person that said the least in workshops and things like that. And or if I was in a writing group, I would contribute, but it wouldn't be, I don't know. I feel like I would ask more questions of people who had more experience and better knowledge. I'd be more open about what I can learn.
I think that may be my regret too, is I wish I'd done better with my education, you know, in all my classes, because as a writer, you realize there's no irrelevant knowledge. Robert, tell us, did we already talk to, did you tell us what you would do differently? What about you, Shaun? Is there anything you would change?
it's interesting to think about, because I feel like the only thing I guess I'd really change is to tell myself to go a little easier on myself. Like, it took me longer than I wanted to publish my first book. It took, to get my first publication, to get into grad school, to do all the things that I'd set out to do. I was always behind the schedule I had in my own head. But at the same time, looking back, it's like, no, I needed that time to get good enough to do these things. So like, I wasn't ready either emotionally or professionally for these things beforehand. So honestly, I think the only thing that I would do differently is try to tell myself to relax a little bit, that like, just with the, to understand that like, this is all part of it. That it's all part of the journey, that you're heading in the right direction. It's the same thing you should probably be telling yourself every day working on a novel too. Is like, you're heading in the right direction, just keep going. And have faith that you're going to come out the other end where you want to be.
It actually anticipates a question from Benji. How do you stop the negative voice in your head? Or do you stop it? Do you use that in some way?
Me?
Anybody.
Oh, okay.
At this point, I'm throwing it up to anybody because the questions are pouring in, which is delightful. I don't know about you guys. I verge between megalomania, like this is the greatest thing ever written, Shakespeare will have to make way for me, to absolute, this doesn't make sense. These are barely sentences. How do you quiet, or how do you cope with the negative voice? I assume you have them.
Don't go on Goodreads.
Say it louder.
Don't go on Goodreads.
Don't read reviews. Don't read reviews. Do you have, like self-doubt when you're working on something? Do you ever think this is, so Jill, you're nodding enthusiastically. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
you have self-doubt because it's not going the way that you want it to go. Like the gap between, there's a meme on the internet of like a beautiful finished cake, and you're like in my head, and then it's like this horrible that nailed it show, right? So we all have that, and even when you're not having that, this industry will find a way to punch you in the face sometimes.
Right.
So I think it's a little like faith, right? You just have to have faith in yourself, and sometimes your faith wanes or you question. Really love it and want to do it, you piece by piece, word by word, rebuild that faith. For me, it's also that writer community who like comes along with the bag of frozen peas and puts them on the punch that you just took. It's not magic. We all still do it. I mean, everybody on this call is a really successful author. We're all sitting here going, yeah, sometimes it's really hard and it sucks and I don't believe myself. And you just word by word kind of rebuild your faith in the project that you're working on.
So Kimberly, I see you nodding as well. What are your thoughts on this topic?
I call Robert Gwaltney. And we laugh and commiserate. And really, I think for me, the thing that I have learned, it's very intimidating to me to be around other authors. It's not intimidating to be in a room full of readers. I have a good time when I go and I teach and we're talking about story. It's intimidating to me when I start worrying about what other people who are my peers think about me and my work. Mm-hmm. And that's where my doubt creeps in. So I guess my advice is don't worry about being the smartest person in the room or the most accomplished. Don't go into things set on, proving something about yourself. And when you're deepest in your doubt, find somebody to talk story with, and remember that feeling, that thing that happens when you get excited about a story idea, even if it's somebody else's, that little, oh yeah, that's the thing, that thing that you love. You have to fall in love with it over and over again. And if you're busy falling in love, then you kind of forget to be scared.
Yeah, it's definitely the good times are very good. I'm going to go to Robert next because he was called out as a go-to person for reassurance. One time in one of my doldrums, my wife said, remember this. because you go through this every time.
Yeah.
And when you're at the high point, just remember this. And another writer, Richard Bausch said, your self-doubt is actually part of your gift. Your self-doubt is actually part of your gift. So Robert, I'm calling you on the phone now, and I'm just absolutely in a slump. Life is terrible. The cat has not been fed, and I can't seem to get a word onto the computer screen. What do you tell me that will lift my spirits and save me from drink?
Oh gosh. Well, I think that
We do that too.
Well,
Yeah.
yes. I'm sorry. When I said trade me for drink, that's what I meant to say.
we haven't bathed in days. We haven't brushed our teeth, and we're just yammering on the phone. I think that it's just comforting to know that someone else is feeling similarly, and I think that it's important. Benji was asking about how do you manage self-doubt. I think that for me, I work really hard not comparing my journey as a writer to the journey of other writers, because we're all on different journeys, and you'll just go mad, and I think that what's important too is to celebrate the successes of others and put that positive energy out into the world. It certainly has helped me. I am where I am until I'm not, and my journey is unique to me. And I've made peace with that over this past year, and it really does help. I think that, Benji, for example, he's got a book out into the world. So obviously someone thinks that you're a wonderful writer, and many readers do as well. So you have to celebrate those little successes along the way too. You have to stop and you have to think, well, what have I done up to this point?
Right.
The fact that someone reads your book is a huge success. The fact that someone wanted to publish it and put it out into the world is a significant milestone.
And the fact that you have the discipline to sit and write every day is itself puts you in the top, 1% of humanity. I saw Piper nodding at what you said, and she has the same sense, and I have the same thing. It's like, this may not be the greatest novel ever written, but I am the only one in the world, in the history of the universe, who could write this one. If I don't write it, it will go unwritten. And that is a form of encouragement too. Shaun, what encouragement do you have to give us?
Yeah, Shaun,
None.
come on.
Come on, Shaun.
As far as shutting down the negative voice goes, I think it's just acknowledge, like trying to pretend that it's not there doesn't make it go away. Just acknowledging that it's there in the room. And I read something recently, and I really wish I could remember who wrote it. It was a visual artist talking about their process and how when you're young and you're first starting out, so much of it is about, like Gilly said, the muse sitting on your shoulder and getting excited, and there's an emotional high, like early on in a romantic relationship, but how that's not really what sees you through a project. And I think just keeping that in mind, that like acknowledging the voice is there, it may have a good point, but it's like, yeah, I know this sucks, but this is what we're doing today. Like, buckle up, like we're going to write badly today. And, you're just going to have to live with that. And once the voice is acknowledged, once you acknowledge the fact that the feeling is there and accept it, rather than trying to banish it or do some magic thing to make you feel like you're 19 again and freshly in love, it isn't really a realistic way to do it, at least for me. And that's been hugely encouraging to me recently, is just that idea of like, no, it's just work. It's work. And work doesn't feel good a lot of the time. Even when you're doing the work you want to do, work is still work. Some days it doesn't feel like work, but most days it does. And work sucks. Like, I don't like it. So, I think just acknowledging that and learning to live with it can go a long way towards actually getting the work done.
Someone asked Hemingway when he got inspiration, he said 9 to 5 weekdays. Andy, what is your hopeful thing to banish the negative voices from our heads?
I think it's a lot of what everybody's been saying. The self-doubt can be an asset to us. It can be something that we listen to. It can help steer us in a direction that might be the right direction. The idea of talking to other people who are creative, finding community, and not judging yourself by those other people in that community, because chances are the smartest writer in the room who carries him or herself or their self that way is probably not the person you want to talk to and be pals with.
Right.
Because I think most of us are all in the same boat. And it's one of Benji's questions here is, are you ever comfortable with where you are in your career, or are you always striving? And I think given all of the answers to this question, most of us would probably say we're always striving, because we're always fighting against something that we feel like is either holding us back, or we're holding ourselves back, or something to that effect. So and as you write and publish and you become more known, in your own mind, the dream of what it is to be a writer is ever receding. So you hit a milestone, but then it moves further away, right? And you have to chase that further. So yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the discoveries you just, about being a published author is that you think it's somehow going to change everything. And things do change, but actually not. Your family still treats you the same. You're still the same person. It doesn't really change anything. And I think you're right that your expectations, sort of recede in front of you. It's just the nature of human condition. If you didn't strive, I mean, what would be the purpose of it? Someone asked about reading. The answer, I assume, is just yes. What I'll ask you is, like, maybe what do you read that your readers wouldn't expect? Is there anything in your current reading list that you would think people would find it odd that I was reading this thing? And you don't have to, if it's porn, you don't have to tell us. But so what is it? Is there anything you read that's like, you enjoying it, but you might think someone else would find it, at least unexpected?
No.
No. Okay, good
Writers
answer.
have to read like some of
Do
everything.
you guys read primarily fiction or nonfiction, or is it a mix of the two?
I read primarily fiction.
Okay.
Me too.
Andy, what about you? Also a fiction reader?
Mostly fiction, but I mean, I do pick up nonfiction. I enjoy reading books on craft, actually, especially if I'm stuck on a problem. I'll pick up a book that some other writer has written that's smarter than me, that has some sort of advice to impart.
Right. Kimberly, what about you?
I mean, I'm pretty eclectic in what I read, and because I'm writing historical fiction, I do a lot of reading nonfiction and research, and I read newspapers, I read magazines, I read historical articles, and I can't really think of anything that I don't read. I still read the cereal box, y'all. So like I'm very eclectic in what I read, and I can't think of anything that would be shocking though, or like surprising or strange, except that I do like kind of weird things sometimes, and I like serial stuff, and I like to find something strange, like if I can find something that's on any kind of magic, or I love to find little obscure journals and those kinds of things. But I think you would know that from reading my work. So I can't think of anything.
So perhaps that's not a surprise. So I'm just responding to questions now. What is, just in general, what is some advice you've got before that's really helpful? We may have covered this before. Just a potpourri. What have you heard before in any situation, or you've discovered for yourself that would be worth passing on?
Well, I'm going to steal my co-authors. This is the greatest part about being a co-author, is you can steal each other's best lines. My co-author Kim Jones always says, aspire to be a great editor, right? Because most of our, maybe there's some people in here who don't adhere to this, but most of our first drafts are trash, right? They are first drafts for a reason. They require revision. A lot of us are getting to know the story at that point in time, or we're just getting words in. And so I think sometimes we, as a new author, I still do this. I compare my early draft with somebody else's finished and published work. And it creates a terrible sense of, self-doubt and whatever. So I'm learning to aspire to be a great editor, so that no matter what you can't fix a blank page. So get it all out, and then work on, sort of develop those revision muscles.
Right. I think that's a great thing about these sort of conferences, is you realize that the process of writers is messy. In movies, I think it's pernicious. They show, they're just typing away, and then they say the end, and then, yay, I'm finished. And then they're suddenly on a book tour. And it's like, no, don't tell people that. That's evil. Don't tell people that. Shaun, what is some good advice you have just in general?
Oof. Aside from the work thing that I already mentioned, I'm struggling here to think of something that some little pearl. Can we come back to me? I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Pass is always a fair answer.
Okay.
Piper, do you have any just general pearls?
Well, in terms of when people are ready for this, and I guess this is apropos because people have been pitching and stuff here at Broadleaf or whatever. No agent is better than a bad agent. When you have an agent, you are the one in charge of the agent. It's not the other way around. A lot of these agents are out here feeling they're God's gift.
Right.
Have somebody who's like that, who treats you like that, talks down to you.
You've
They're
had a bad
not
experience, I can tell.
They're not the agent for
Right.
you. So
Right.
you need to have someone where it is clear.
Uh-huh.
That's the best advice that I feel that I've ever gotten in terms of that. Well, it's just that the same rules apply to publishers. Yes, but ultimately they're the ones who publish the book. The thing about agents is a lot of them they're in this headspace where it's like they feel that they're the ones and they're not.
Right.
So it's like there's a lot of people out there who get stuck with someone who's not good for them. And you need to be very careful about who you are selecting, because you want someone who's absolutely clear about who's in charge.
Right. That's very good. That's very good advice. I think, when you get your first agent or get your first, book, you're so elated.
Right.
It's like, you can't, the power to negotiate is something you don't think you have. Robert, what's your best general advice of any sort?
So my first day of first grade, my Granny Louise and my mother took me to school, Southside Elementary School. And I didn't know what this meant initially, but my Granny Louise bent down into my ear and she said, always find the smart people in the room and sit next to them. And I think that's the best advice anyone's ever given me, because I never want to be the smartest, most talented in the room, because that's a room I'm not going to grow in. That's interesting. That's very interesting. I like the fact too, that's less of that is a writing lesson, but it's also a life lesson. Surround yourself with people who are going to stretch you in some way. Andy, what about you? What is your best, advice?
Best advice I ever got as a writer was from one of my teachers, Barry Hanna. He had a little mantra that he would repeat to us, and it was beginning, middle, end, thrill me. And he said, that's how you write a short story. And I've sort of since taken that. That's how you write everything, essentially. You have to have a structure, and you have to have an element that engages the reader in some way, exciting, emotionally, however it is. So yeah.
That's a great segue. So we've dealt with the inspiration, getting started. We're well armed to deal with an agent who may be less than satisfactory. We've quelled, or at least acknowledged, the negative voices in our heads, and sometimes the negative, unhelpful voices around us. What are some advice on just craft? I'm now going to shape my novel, and I know we've got different approaches. Some of you are plotters, and some of you are pantsers. So, from your perspective, like what's the best advice you have for just now? You're going to structure your novel. How do you go about it, and what would be helpful to someone who works the way that you work? just absolute crickets. That's okay. Well, I'm going to give you some advice I have. I'm a pantser. And Andy talked about looking at craft books. I have craft books. I actually kind of dislike them because I feel constrained if I read them. But after I've written something that I've struggled through and it's just a hot mess, I'll take craft book recommendations and troubleshoot with it. And then I can sort of smooth out what I have. But it's hard for me to write from a framework. I've just never been able to do it well. It just feels imprisoning. What about character development? Is there anything you think of as far as making a likable, interesting, troubling character that would be useful to our audience? And it might just because you're in the upper right of my screen, Gilly, but I see you smiling at that. What tips do you have for character development?
So I'm a big character worksheet kind of person, right? When I'm struggling with a character is getting to know, because only a very small amount of the character ever really ends up on the page. But in order to figure out how a character is going to react in a certain situation or what information or knowledge they have, you're going to have to know a lot about them. So when I'm stuck, a lot of times I do go online and like find a character development worksheet or those types of things. I am a plotter. I'm an extreme plotter. This also goes back to that writing in the cracks and forward movement thing, right? It helps for me to know where I need to go today and not kind of be wandering in the wilderness. So a lot of times for me, it's really, I'm a save the cat, writes a novel kind of gal. And I keep that when I'm having a writing session, that's tucked in my purse always. And a lot of times I'm like, oh, there, there's my next goalpost. There's my next mile marker I'm trying to reach.
Right. So yeah, so if you're writing, especially in a, I'm going to write this scene, these things must happen in the scene. I think I do the same. Do you do that too, Shaun? Like when you're writing a scene, you're thinking, okay, this, whatever else, this scene must move from point A to point B. Is that how you're working?
It depends. Sometimes I work from a more structured place. Sometimes I will start a scene without knowing where it's going, just putting two characters in a room and kind of letting them negotiate that space together. I've been doing a lot of that on the new book that I'm working on right now, because I haven't got, like, I've got an overarching outline of where I know the story needs to go, but there's a lot of white space between the big events, and I kind of have to figure out how do the characters get there. So a lot of it is almost expositional, them explaining to each other like, well, we could do this, we could do that, stuff that the reader doesn't really need in the long run, but that I need. But it also helps me get to know them. And sometimes I end up getting surprised by that. And so I end up with a scene I never would have ended up with if I tried to plan it. So, it's not the most efficient way to get an interesting scene, but it's definitely a technique that has worked for me in the past and seems to be working for me right now. So
Piper, when you're writing a series and it's going to be moving through history, do you have to think in terms of, I've got to, I need to finish the story, it's got to be wrapped up, but at the same time, there has to be an opening for the next generation, or is that a concern for you?
Well, yeah, that's how it works. And I usually think about sort of historical milestones or things that have happened in history that I want to portray in a story that will come next. It's sort of my Home to Milford College series, which is centered around a fictitious, historically Black college and university. Book one concerns itself with the founding, and then book two concerns itself with the voting process in the wake of Reconstruction, and then book three concerns itself with that early part of Reconstruction when Black people who were part of the establishing the schools had political power, and when it was taken away. They did in terms of returning to those schools and building from there. So it's sort of how I think about it in terms of events and what characters work best against that historical backdrop. To sort of bring those
Are
events
you
to
a
life.
plotter or a pantser?
I'm a plotster.
Okay.
Suppose.
What about
I
you?
tend to
Oh,
write around in something for the first couple of chapters, and then I'll plot the rest of it out.
okay, so you sort of do some exploratory writing first, and then say, okay, I've got a foothold, and now I'm going to go ahead and draft an outline.
Yeah.
Robert, where do you fall on that spectrum, and what's your process for negotiating it?
I think I'm a bit of a hybrid too, like Piper. I have to know the beginning, the middle, and the end of a story. For me, I mean, part of the excitement of writing is not knowing everything that's going to happen, but I use those key things that are going to happen in the book as guideposts, and I try to keep the characters within those constraints best I can. But I don't enjoy knowing everything up front. I have a sense the arc of the story, and the fun part to me is just getting the characters there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Andy, how about you? Are you a pantser or a plotter?
I'm a plotter.
Okay.
I fill up a notebook with ideas and possible things and maps and just character ideas. But once I get like an idea of what the story should be generally, I start with note cards. I think in terms of a 3-act structure, I very much apply like a sort of screenwriting, principles of screenwriting, basically, to novel plotting. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to fold together two questions. People are asking Benji's asking what writing guides you use. And also somewhere in there was, do you steal or borrow techniques from your favorite authors? I assume the answer to both of those or the answer to the second one's going to be yes. I'd love you to tell us, specific authors that you might return to that you reread simply to say, okay, how the hell did they do this? Like, how do they achieve this effect that you've learned from? And also your recommendation for a good book on writing, if you have one, and what you think are the specific benefits of it. So, Piper, I'll start with you. Is there authors you return to frequently to say this person's going to teach me how to write?
Well, when I look and think about that kind of thing, I'm always reading in the market that I write for. And I know that some people don't do that. Some people feel like that they're intimidated to not and don't want to read what the other people are doing. But I'm working with someone right now who's in the same genre. And it's kind of like some of her lack of knowledge about the market is a little bit unsettling for me in terms of this kind of business. For me, reified the fact that reading in the market that I write of historical fiction is a good thing and not a bad thing. In terms of taking a look at the landscape and seeing who's doing what, because I write more in genre, seeing what the latest trends are. I tend to hang out in a lot of readers groups and eavesdrop there in terms of thinking about certain things. But I have books that I wish I had written that book. Those are the ones that I tend to go back and revisit those books. One of them is Kindred by Octavia Butler.
Okay.
So it's like, yeah, in terms of what she teaches, in terms of the way that particular book is structured and the approaches to characters and all that other kind of stuff. Yeah. I do like gathering up the writing books, but my favorite one is usually like the one that I bought most recently. So I have a thing where I've collected them and I have them, but then I put them to the side, kind of thing. So you got to think about that practice in terms of giving my money aimlessly away to people who's writing, whoever's writing the latest writing guide.Maybe I don't use them as much as I think I do. It might be a bit of a crutch.
Well, maybe buying the book itself is just setting an intention. Like,
yeah,
my God, I'm a writer. I'm going to buy a book on this. What about you, Kimberly? Who are authors you've returned to, such as Octavia Butler? And is there a particular craft book that you really liked, that you bought and read that you could talk about?
Yeah,
Sorry, that was mean, Piper. I'm a bad person.
I feel like she just gave my answer, because is true. I have a lot of craft books. Most of them I bought early on when I first started writing, and I identified with what you said, that I love the idea of a plan, like what Andy does. Like that is really appealing to me and my overachiever brain. But the reality of it tends to make me clamp down and just shut down. So I have a mixture of both that somehow allows me to work in between the rules, I guess. And then the reading that I do is for inspiration or to get my juices flowing is always fiction, and it's typically within my genre. And I'm doing what Piper's doing, because you want to learn what your peers are doing in the market, right? You want to understand what's selling, why it's selling, what readers are comfortable with, if they respond well to certain risks or not within your genre. But on top of that, I like to read books that kind of push the limits, that challenge those expectations. They're the books I enjoy the most, and it tends to be how I write. So
can you give us a title?
I go back to books like V.E. Schwab's Addie LaRue, and I loved Circe. I love everything that Alice Hoffman does, but I really like to go and read. She's got a collection of short stories called Blackbird House. And I'm reading for language, and I'm reading for how they weave their stories together, and I'm taking it apart as a writer, looking at it academically. But I'm also reading it it just sort of feeds your soul as a writer to get into that language again. And it helps me go back to my own work refreshed. So craft books shut me down. I need language to get me moving.
Do you ever go back to a particular writer to, you're faced with a dilemma or a challenge that you can't quite master, and you say, author X did this, let me just see how they managed it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I mean when I'm breaking down like what the format is for how they do it. But I have to be careful. Certain authors, especially if they are Southern authors like Barbara Kingsolver, her voice will slip into my voice, and I have to be careful to not do that when I go back to the page with my own work. So I try and be careful with what I read while I'm drafting.
Right. How about you, Andy? So what are your favorite craft books?
Well, I like to read screenwriting books. Like just to be clear, like I don't really pick up books on novel writing, for example. But my favorite craft book that I've ever read actually was a book that was designed to do exactly what it did, which is dissuade you from becoming a screenwriter. It's a book called Writing Movies for Fun and Profit: How We Made $1 Billion at the Box Office and You Can Too. And it's by the guys that wrote the Night at the Museum movies. And the whole point of that book is essentially that this is a difficult business, and it's very tongue-in-cheek, that this is a difficult business to succeed in. And there was a time in my life where I thought that was going to be my path. But in terms of books, I go back to, I actually like to read novels when I'm writing books. When I'm working on a novel, I'll pick up 1 or 2 books that I continually draw from the well, from authors. Cormac McCarthy's one of them. Charles Portis's True Grit.
Oh yeah.
The voice in that book, right?
That's beautiful.
And a book that people don't talk about anymore, if they ever did, and that's The Night of the Hunter by Davis Grubb, which the film is based on that book. It's a beautiful book. So there's a lot about lyricism and language that I go to for other writers' voices that help me when I'm stuck, find a way out of something.
Robert, do you have any good craft books and also fiction books that you return to study your own craft?
Yeah, I have craft books, and and I've read a few, and they just tend to bog me down. But I think that I'm inspired by language. The opening of Beloved is
Mhm.
brilliant. The opening of Robert Goldrick's A Reliable Wife. Um, there are sections of Michael Cunningham's The Hours that I'll return to, and of course there's Pat Conroy. There's this passage that I've read it to Kim before, but I read it over and over when I was trying to conjure writing these children that I wrote in Cicada Tree. And it's, we children sat transfixed before that moon our mother had called forth from the waters. When the moon had reached its deepest silver, my sister Savannah, though only 3, cried aloud to our mother, to Luke and me, to the river and the moon. Oh, Mama, do it again. And I have my first memory.
That's
There's
nice.
something about that that just gets me weepy and excited. It's just lovely.
So Gilly, you talked about Save the Cat, which actually there's one for novels too, but it was originally just a screenwriter's a book. So is that's one of your go-tos, I take it. Is there another one? And what is it you get from Save the Cat that is useful to you? And who are some writers you return to in fiction?
Yeah, I'm a huge craft book person. I think I'm hearing like a little commonality here, and it's like maybe it's the magic key. Maybe this one will make it easier. They never do. Sometimes it's just getting unstuck, right? So I really like Save the Cat Writes a Novel. That's a big go-to of mine. Not everybody loves her, but I actually Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic resonates with me a lot, because it's not so much about how to write, but about how to nurture creativity.
Yes.
So like that, actually, I put that in my category of like my #1 craft book, because it's not about how to write a book, but it's about how to nurture your creativity and keep going when it's hard. So, and there's a really great podcast that accompanied it for a little while called Magic Lessons. So those two. I don't necessarily return to the same writers for craft purposes. I return to the same writers because I love them, but for craft purposes, I'm looking for what I call mentor texts. And I think this is what Kimberly and Piper were both describing, right? And it's not necessarily a book like the one I'm writing, but something that had, so I'm working on a historical, partially sort of a dual timeline one for the first time, and it's really intimidating. And I went and reread The Historian, which has a fabulous book. I love it to pieces. This is one of those books that I'm like, damn, I wish I'd written that. And it's really fabulous. It's got an element of fabulism, which I'm not trying to replicate, but it does a dual timeline historical really, really well. Another older novel that I'm rereading as a mentor text is Possession by A.S. Bayat. So it's not so much about returning to a particular writer, but about seeking out a mentor text that's going to help me navigate the thing that I'm working on right now.
Right, very good. I want to turn to that concept of mentor text. Shaun, is there a craft book that is a go-to for you, and who are some fiction authors that you learn technique from?
Yeah. So I mean, the elephant in the room for craft books is Stephen King's On Writing, which I know well enough probably that I could quote chapter and verse from at this point. But another one that I really like was Benjamin Percy released one a few years ago called Thrill Me. It's pretty short, but he's also a very structure focused writer. So, I'd put this one in the same boat as, Save the Cat. Although it focuses more on individual aspects of craft. So each one is like a little essay rather than a comprehensive, here's how you write a novel. But about things like consider adding a ticking clock to your story, or, things like that. And it's just chock full of great advice and good ideas. And I would highly recommend it to anybody who wants to work on the plot elements of their fiction a little bit more. More so than, there's plenty of great guides for character out there. I would say this one's more plot. As far as writers I come back to, I really liked what Gilly said about mentor texts. There are writers that I come back to over and over again. Stephen King, again, is the big one. But also John Irving was a big one, especially whenever I was younger. When I was writing Cosmology of Monsters, I looked a lot at the Hotel New Hampshire for how he did a family story over decades. Anne Rice as well was a big one for me. growing up. Her sort of damned narrators were a big influence on me at a very impressionable time in my adolescence. And right now, the big one that's sort of a new one for me is Neil Gaiman. I'm going back because I'm working on something that's got some fabulism elements to it, but there's something about the way he structures stories that's very different from how most other fantasy writers structure stories that that I feel like I'm learning a lot from, and hopefully carrying some of that flavor over into whatever I'm working on now. That sense of exploration and play, I feel like is definitely mentoring my current book, to steal from Gilly again. I think that's such an excellent way to put it.
I think, guys, our time is up in a little bit. I got to turn it over to Zach, who's going to give us some closing words. I'll put a plug in for two of my favorite craft books. They're not craft books per se, because I fall in the category of someone who has craft books and yet finds them chilling to read. There's a fairly recent book called Swimming in a Lake in the Rain by George Saunders, and it's just lovely. It's Russian short story, Tolstoy in that crowd. But then he just does an analysis after them, and you feel like, I just want to go out and write. And another one is an older one, and shoot, I can't think of the author's name. It's called Reading Like a Writer. And I can't think, the author's name has slipped my mind. But those are good, just in terms of, not necessarily telling you what to do, as far as giving you permission to go out and try it. Everybody, this has just been great. I've so enjoyed it. I hope you have. Everybody listening in and watching us in cyberspace, I hope you've gotten something out of it. Everybody go out and get to work. We're expecting great things from you. We'll be asking after it later. Zach, are you with us somewhere? I see your little icon. Are you ready to come in and speak to us?
I'm here. I feel like I'm always here.
Yes.
First and foremost, thank you, man, and thank you, everybody. It's a great panel. It's always great to dig into the, advice and experience that you all have accumulated, and to share with everybody. So I know our folks appreciated that. Definitely looking at the comments, they did, and thank you all again. I don't make a lot out of closing remarks, because at this point we're all kind of and doing the best we can. But I did want to say one quick thing, and then get to some thank yous. Benji had, in his very impassioned and wonderful welcome this morning, had made the comment about writing not being solitary. And I know he and I have gone back and forth on the semantics of this, but I would like to reinforce his point, because though the act of writing, putting words down and creating the actual story, is something that is your task and your task alone, you can't do this by yourself. You need to have a community. You need to have support. You need to have people guiding you and helping you and reading and giving you edits and whatever it is along the way. You need to have friends that you can call when you're doubting yourself. You need to have a structure that helps you through it. And being able to take the step and go to writing conferences, or even author programs where you're meeting other writers, or forming critique groups, or whatever it is that you do, taking the steps that you take to build that community and to build that support around you is vital. And so I commend you for being here. I commend you for everything that you do to learn and to grow and to surround yourself with people who can help you. And if you haven't had the opportunity to build that community, then please do. If you need some guidance on how to do that, there's plenty of options on social media that people ask, but email me if you need to, and I'll find somebody for you, because I want you to find your people. I want you to be with your people. And speaking of people, this obviously would not happen without a bunch of them, not the least of which are our wonderful speakers who have shared so much over this weekend and been on multiple panels, or moderating panels, or in the chat talking, or showing up for the lunchtime chats, or even showing up last night when we were doing story time. Thank you all for being here and being the supportive and guiding voice for all of our writers in attendance. The actual conference itself would not have been able to be pulled off without a whole host of people, not the least of which is our conference chairperson, Mary Ann, who did a fabulous job leading people and keeping us smiling the whole way. And right by her side, the vice chair, Jessica Nettles, the queen of chat, as we call her. The two of them did a fabulous job leading the conference and the conference committee. And the conference committee itself is comprised of a number of people who devoted their time, and whether it was Mary Ann running this room, or Will Young running room B, or Vanya Stoyanova being so patient and wonderful and trying to deal with me in the one-on-one room, and all of the people who stepped in for the chat. You guys did a wonderful job. Thank you so much for all that you did. The conference may not have been where we wanted it to be, but it definitely came off well. And from all the feedback I've gotten so far, it sounds like the panels and workshops were as wonderful as we hoped that they would be. I thank you, the attendees, for you being here, for you taking that step, for you supporting not just this community by being a part of it, but supporting yourself by investing in yourself. I say that so much that is on you to invest in you, because if you're not willing to do it, then you can't really expect other people along the way to invest in you as well. We struggle with imposter syndrome. We struggle with self-doubt. Every single time we sit down at the computer, we have one little moment of, am I even good enough to do this? But you have to be able to invest in your dream. And so thank you so much for doing that. And please keep doing it. Wherever you go, keep doing it. Obviously, we're at the end of the 7th annual Broadleaf Writers Conference, but we are working on the 8th annual. And as I mentioned in the opening, we will be at the Decatur Library September 23rd and 24th of next year. It is a wonderful location, and it is a wonderful spot for a conference. And we're very much looking forward to being there, being in person, and making the most out of it that we possibly can. So if you're interested in joining us on a pre-registration special, that is available right now. I know the link has been dropped several times and it is in your program. It's a good way to go ahead and reserve your spot, and you get first dibs on agent sessions as well. But do keep up with us. We are all over the socials. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for at broadleafwriters.com. And I hope to see as many of you as possible in 2 weeks at Foxtail Bookshop in Woodstock. Remember, they are our conference bookseller, and they will have a number of books from our speakers at there. And even if we're not going to have all of our authors there, because some of you are out of town, some of you aren't available, but the books will be there. And so you still have an opportunity to buy them, to support the author, to support the bookstore, and most importantly, to have a really good time for 3 hours chatting and meeting and getting books signed. And we'll have kind of group talk on writing for a bit. And I hope to see you there, because I definitely miss seeing as many of you as I can in person. And with that, I am done talking and out of words, and ready to get started on next year. So thank you all for a wonderful conference. Go write, be a part of something, get involved, and give as much as you can to the writers you know and love.
Amen.
Thank you all.
So long, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.